So you've done Titans, Doom Patrol, and now Peacemaker, all in collaboration with Clint Menzel. How did you two meet, and what keeps you working together now that you're 3 shows in?
So Clint and I, we met at an awards dinner for BMI, which is our royalty society, and we were both receiving an award that evening. And we just sat at the same table, and just sort of hit it off. I think Clint's a really fun guy, and he's also, Clint is so out of the box, which is something that I cultivate and I love. Non-cookie cutter people and composers, and his personality is very non-cookie cutter too, and he's just a lot of fun. So on a personal level, we got along really well, and then Clint started getting some projects that, he was working on, Noah or whatever. And there was another film that we worked on first a long time ago, well, before Titans. And so I was able to, take some of the overflow and help him out. And then when Titans came along, it became like a true collaboration. Clint's really, really good with like esoteric synthesizers and electronic music, and had a vision for Titans that was less kind of what had been happening with a lot of the superhero shows, more towards the leaning into the 80s and 70s synths. And the orchestra is still there in Titans, but then even like in Doom Patrol, we took it further, and really, really got crazy electronic, and continue to. And that really suits that show, in my opinion, because it's just such an unusual show. I mean, something that's based on donkey flatulence, is probably gonna need some kind of an unusual score. So anyhow, it's just become, we've worked together more. And then on Peacemaker, I believe Clint knew Peter Safran, who's the executive producer, and had worked with him. And I know that James also had wanted to work with Clint too, and knew of Clint's work. Mm-hmm. And I think he also knew my stuff. So it just worked out really good. But yeah, so that's kind of the journey that we took.
That's great. And do you feel like for those shows you're supplying more of the orchestral stuff or organic thing? I mean, I see all the guitars behind you. Like, I think there's something that, not that he doesn't have, but like something that you specifically bring to the partnership?
Not so much, really. I think we Clint is really a broad strokes kind of person. And yeah, I know I have more of like just myself, an orchestral background, although I don't have any formal musical education. But now I'm doing John Williams classicism in the Star Wars franchise. But I mean, I'll lean into the electronic stuff just as hard as Clint does. So it's kind of on a cue by cue basis. I'll tell you what Clint's really big on, and it's really cool, is the emotions. And when we were talking about James Gunn is really big on that too. And when he talks about Peacemaker, he doesn't talk about the jokes or the action or all that. He talks about the emotional journey that Chris Smith is on. Mm-hmm. And who he is as a person, and all of his struggles with his father and his upbringing. And, you start to see this. I mean, it's super heavy, and who he is really heavy. And as the show continues to develop, he's got relationships with the team, with Adebayo, with Harcourt, with, Economos. All those, there's personal relationships there that are opening up his emotional kind of journey, or whatever you would call it. And James would talk about that forever. And Clint really got into that, especially using guitar as the emotional instrument, and that kind of evolved from the late 80s, early 90s hair metal influences that the soundtrack has, so rather than using a piano or something, a cello or whatever might typically be used, Clint was really big on using electric guitar, 12-string guitar, really leaning into being super melodic the way bands were back in the, in the late 80s, early 90s. Unapologetically, accessible ballady melodies.
Right. Right. And the guitar does feel like the kind of the hallmark of the show, especially even with the songs that James Gunn is placing in it. But are there other parts of the score that you're really proud of, or you think, deserve more credit as well?
No, I mean, for me, I grew up playing Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath. I grew up fairly poor, and I couldn't buy a lot of records, but the ones I had like Sabbath, I think 1, 2, and 3. I mean, Zeppelin 1, 2, and 3. And then Sabbath Paranoid, probably wore that one out. Just wore the grooves out on that. And then also as playing solos, I was kind of into the Allman Brothers for a bit, and Yes, the real technical kind of semi-classical rock fusion kind of thing. So I would say what I'm most proud of the Peacemaker score is that it's a hybrid score, and it has orchestra in it sometimes. Especially you'll hear, they gave us a live orchestra for, a lot of the soundtrack. We'll have that when it comes out, the finale. But it's still, in its roots, it's all about rocking, and so even though you have the orchestra there, the real foundation is a good groove. I philosophically, I feel guys like, Hans Zimmer and Brian Tyler and those kind of guys, when they do the shun, 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 it really, when they do that with strings, it's really a guitar lick that they're just having the cellos and the violas and the violins play, and so sometimes in Peacemaker, it'll start out as the guitar lick, and it'll be just like something that I do on guitar, and then it'll evolve into like a string ostinato. So yeah, I mean, I have so much fun, and I'm like, my head is banging. I am just dancing around my studio when I do this show. I swear to goodness. And so if you talk about what I'm proud of, I hope everybody else can like just really, dance to some of the grooves that we came up with.
Oh yeah, I think you were very successful in that. So where did you start learning composition and conducting and arranging and all of that, if you didn't go to?
Oh man, we need about a 3-hour interview for that one. I started as a guitarist, and then I was, got pretty decent in my hometown. And then my mother told me that, she supported me and would take me, have bands over and everything like that at our house and have rehearsal in our garage. But, once I went to college, I had to be a doctor or a lawyer. So I chose doctor, and then I started burning out like, my junior year, and I started gigging around LA. And I saw that actually I could play with some of the guys in LA, and I didn't really think coming from a small town, you don't know that you can do that. And then I kind of got a job conducting for a group, and then doing arrangements for them. And when you start doing arrangements, say if you're doing trumpet parts or even violin parts, because we would do Tokyo, and then we'd have a full orchestra that would back this group that I was music director for. When you start writing those, that's kind of composing, because there's not really a trumpet part for whatever song we were doing. So you have to make that up as an arranger. And I think that naturally flowed into composing. But I have no formal music education. I continue to study scores. There's a Stravinsky score, right? What is it? It's Stravinsky Petrushka sitting on the floor. I don't want to mess up my place.
Yep.
And I was studying that a few days ago. So I try to overcompensate for my lack of musical education by continuing to study, guys that I'm not familiar with.
Sure. And as you mentioned, you've been working with your sons, Dean and Sean, for years now, right? So how to work so closely with family, and at what age did you start involving them?
Well, Sean, it was after he graduated. He was going to be a screenwriter, and he went to Pepperdine, and he graduated, and he kind of wallowed in that for a while. And I was doing a Clone Wars episode, and he walked into my studio, and he started chuckling, and I'm like, "What are you laughing about?" And he's like, "Well, the temp track. Do you know what a temp track is? It's when they'll put temporary music on a rough cut that they give me." And he goes, "Well, so on this one Clone Wars, he goes, oh, that's from Indiana Jones," and he told me the scene and what Indiana Jones movie it was from. And I'm like, wow, you really know this stuff. So I had him start helping me temp, taking my old cues from Clone Wars and putting them into new episodes so that we could. And so he was kind of doing music editing, but in a way composing. And then
did he play instruments as well?
Yeah, Sean was like, possibly could have been like one of those savant touring 11-year-old pianists. Right. I mean, he was, by the time he was 10 years old, he was monstrously fast, and he would practice every morning, and it was just a blur because he was trying to get the lesson over with. So he would just but he was a very, very good piano player. Mm-hmm. Dean was a guitarist and Barry sax player, and both of them were in the high school band. And then Dean went to the Berklee College of Music. Mm-hmm. But Sean was, then became alto sax player, and did solos in the jazz band and stuff like that, and learned how, from a really good sax teacher, learned how to improvise jazz and stuff like that. So I never really encouraged them to become musicians, but they naturally were pretty good at it. And now what happens is there will be cues. I mean, there was a thing we did for a movie called Ghost in the Shell. Mm-hmm. And that was with Clint, right? Yeah. And so we worked on an action cue, and all of us kind of wanted to work on this big action cue. I did. And so Sean really wanted to do it. And so I said, well, we'll both turn in our version. We'll see what the studio takes. And the studio winds up using his cue, not mine. So, and I mean, that happens over and over and over. I mean, we write together sometimes, and we live, or we have our studio in the same place, and I'll walk by his desk or Dean's or whatever. And I'll add something, or I'll have suggestions. The other day, I was just watching episode 4 of Peacemaker, and there was a guitar emotional cue that I did. Mm-hmm. And then Dean had walked into my studio, and he sort of heard another guitar part, and it was kind of a trippy thing that he, I forget which scene it was. I was just watching it. But anyhow, I'm like, wow, that's actually the coolest lick on that whole cue is the thing that Dean came up with. It's really amazing to me, and it's very gratifying. It's also gratifying that producers and studios and network executives will comment specifically on something that my sons came up with. And I know I'm not just being a proud dad or something like that.
Sure. Wow. And in terms of working with James Gunn, you've obviously worked with a ton of directors and showrunners over the years. Does something stand out to you about working with him specifically?
Um, yeah, I mean, when somebody is really good, and I mean, I've been doing this for 39 years,
Mhm.
and I can probably count on maybe two hands. I might need a toe or two, like the really, really talented people I've ever worked with. You know, I mean, I've done thousands and thousands of episodes of
Mhm.
television and 50 movies or 40 or something like that. And it's just, you just know when somebody's got it, you know, and it's, he is concise in his communicating of what he wants. Um, he's got a really good team and he trusts them. Fred Raskin is his main editor, and Fred is really good with the temp track. And you know, that's kind of, the temp track is a way to communicate whether it's good or bad. And sometimes we will talk and say, hey, the temp is really not working here. And Fred will say something like, yeah, I couldn't find anything. We've just put it in because it's a placeholder, but maybe the tempo is right. But the temp track gives you an opportunity to talk about music in a concrete way. You know, there's this saying that like talking about is like dancing about architecture. You know,
Great.
it's very difficult to, you know, you can say I want something dark, but what the hell does that mean? Does that mean like Stravinsky dark? Does that mean Ozzy Osbourne dark? I mean, what does dark mean? So,
Right.
you know, the temp track gives you a really good kind of jumping off point, either whether it's good or bad. And James is like spot on. He knows what he hears, he knows what he likes, and really good at talking about that. Also, after we've done our first pass,
Mhm.
his notes come back, and there's no vagueness in them, and there's no sugarcoating. It's just, I like that. I really don't like this. The reason I don't like this is because this and this. The reason I do like this is because and that's really important, because when you find out why he likes something, you can do that more often, you know.
Yeah.
And so it just becomes a great collaboration. And when you work with, and then he trusts you to go out and do what he likes. You know, once he's told you a couple times, you should get that shit. You know, you should figure that out and do it.
Yeah.
And I think we accomplished that. So it was really, really enjoyable. One of the smoothest experiences I've ever had. And yeah, just really, really, I wish I could just do that every day.
Sure. And it was James Murphy, right, who scored the Suicide Squad film?
John Murphy.
John Murphy, sorry.
Yeah.
And was his score for that film, did that influence what you did on the show as well?
I think what more had the influence on what we did is the influence of the late 80s, early 90s hair metal kind of thing. So the rock influence was there. And I think that was there in John's score to Suicide Squad as well. You know, John Murphy is one of my favorite composers in film music right now. I mean, I think Harry Gregson Williams, John Powell, John Murphy. I mean, those are really some of the great composers out there right now, and I have tremendous respect for them. What John did on 28 Days Later is insane. I mean, that's a really, really great score.
Yeah.
But yeah, I haven't met John, and we have a mutual friend, but we've never actually spoken to each other. I would love to know, because I believe he used guitar as an emotional component as well. And I don't know if we independently came upon that or what. It's sort of like with Clone Wars. I know Ludwig used bass recorder, and
Yeah.
I'd done that, you know, on Ahsoka Leaves, you know, 5 years before that or whatever on my Clone Wars and I played the bass recorder myself on it. So I don't know where Ludwig. I got to ask him if he got the idea for me or he came upon it independently. It doesn't. Sometimes things just naturally flow that way, and they work, And with Suicide Squad and Peacemaker, it's going to be a rock score, and it's going to have, there's certain things that just naturally follow, I think.
Sure. That makes sense. So actually mentioning Ludwig, I was wondering, you've worked on a lot of shows like Clone Wars or Peacemaker, where the characters, themes, tones have kind of already been established. Is it ever a challenge for you to jump in and add your own touch without being precious about what comes before or worrying about it?
In almost all of these instances, like, Clone Wars, George Lucas really didn't want us to use many of John's themes that often. And when they were used at very important moments. And so when you hear the Force theme come in, it's like, whoa, like there's something going on here. So I was given a lot of freedom in that, in that sense. And then with Peacemaker, there was nothing that was taken from the Suicide Squad films in terms of thematically at all. So, throughout my career, even in Titans or whatever, I mean, these are all new themes, and they're all, I'm a composer and Clint's a composer, and we have our own ideas. And I'm pretty sure that's what James was wanting out of us, was what's our take on, given the parameters of that, the source music is this kind of hair metal thing, and also the parameters that it is a film score, and we're going to use orchestra, and we're going to be hybrid. So how are we going to accomplish that? And we went about that in the way whatever came into our head. That's what we did.
Sure. And I don't think we know about any Peacemaker season 2 or anything yet, but is there anything, what are you working on now? What's up next for you? I'm sure you're very busy.
So I'm currently working on an ABC show called Promised Land, which is about Mexican immigrants who've become wealthy owners, vintners in Sonoma, and they own a vineyard. And so that's, I'm co-composing that with Gustavo Santaolalla, as I did the Narcos Mexico score. But it's very different from Narcos Mexico. Actually, that show comes out tonight, Promised Land. So Monday night on ABC. I'm also working on a show for AMC called Dark Winds, and it's after a series of novels about a Navajo detective. And it's called the Leaphorn Chi series of novels, and J.R.R. Martin is involved in that. It's a really cool show. Or is it G.R.R.? It's G.R.R. Martin. Yeah, sorry. And got a documentary coming out about murders in England. Was not similar, but I did Making a Murderer, which was a big thing a couple of years ago. Titans and Doom Patrol are about to start up again. And I have a video game that I can't really announce yet, but it's pretty cool. And I have another animated project that I can't talk about that's really cool. And I continue to do the Star Wars Bad Batch. Yeah. And maybe something else in Star Wars animated land that I can't talk about. So,
wow. So lots of time.
Yeah, my fingers are smoking right now.
Yeah.
I mean.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll just ask one more, which is, in a world where you do have free time, is there anything else musically that you want to explore at some point, or do you get to kind of flex all of your muscles with what you're doing now?
Yeah, just given what I just mentioned, and the variety of styles and stuff, from classical, orchestral Star Wars to playing weird guitar-based instruments for Promised Land, or no. I mean, I'm doing exactly what I want to do. Every day is a ton of fun for me, and the variety is really cool.